If you haven't already, sign up for Wikisana. Thank you.
Dear viewers, a very warm welcome to today's show, Visite. I thank you very much for taking the time to create this show together with me. And I thank you for all your valuable contributions. I am very much reminded that the rise in psychiatric diseases, but also of an incredibly high number of depressive moods in people, up to the rise of neurodegenerative diseases, such as Parkinson's, MS, dementia, should actually deal with a substance. That is not just a shadow existence, but which is referred to by American neurologist Anna Feltz as Cinderella drug. Cinderella drug is the name for the drug. Who was Cinderella? Cinderella was such a wonderful person, but she was not perceived, and she was always excluded from the important things in life. And she was actually never there with her family and her stepmother when it came to big things. This substance is a trace element. It is the trace element number 3 in the period system, and we know it in psychiatry in a high dosage, but it has not yet been established in the dosage of a supplement. And a supplement would mean that I can improve my mood, so I can strengthen my mental and psychological health. So I can improve my possible addiction disorders. I can better regulate my control, my impulse control. And I can also delay my mental degradation. This trace element ensures that the resistance force and the growth of our nerves is stimulated, and it changes the gene expression on the cellular side. I.e., on a genetic level, it improves this expression of the genes. That means we are talking about a substance here, and it is lithium. Lithium in the lowest dosage, as I said, is the element number 3 in the period system, and we do not have any worldwide studies, because the substance is incredibly cheap. Of course, there is not necessarily a huge interest on the pharmaceutical level. But it has been known for many, many decades, and there are already smaller studies that show that, especially in criminals. William Walsh did a study 40 years ago that the lithium level in criminals was significantly too low. That means, according to observations in experimental medicine, it improves the mental, it improves the emotional, it improves behavioral problems. People who are always latent under a certain fear and anxiety, who are so insecure, who, as I say, always put their own feet on the ground and fall over it and thus come to an unfortunate situation, can be substantially supported by this essential mineral substance. And often it is also the lack of this lithium. Let me explain to you later where it intervenes everywhere in which metabolism systems lithium intervenes. Lithium is only then, over the kidneys, actually after about 4 to 12 hours is the half-life. It is excreted about 95% again over the kidneys. Also a little over saliva, stool and sweat, only by 5%. Lithium in the high dosage, and now it's also about knowing lithium, in schizophrenia and depression in the past, it's about really high doses with a certain high-grade potential for change. And so slowly this high-dose therapy has slipped out of psychiatric treatment. But I'm not talking about 300, 400 milligrams, I'm talking about 5. A maximum of 30 milligrams, adapted, low dose, slowly adapt to the state themselves and not go higher. These are very valuable starting situations, and I will maybe correct it a little more in a more classical way. Because let's clarify it, if I'm in a very strong anger or in journal in a very strong aggressiveness, then this emotional abuse that I need more, and of course also with my environment, is significantly weakened. Sometimes it is also mood swings that are due during the day, or affective disorders, which can be stabilized by lithium. People with hyperactivity, but also with attention deficit, are better balanced here. The impulse control improves, and the fear changes. If you ask me, what is actually the biggest enemy of human health, then the list is of course of many things and endless, and yet at first place there is one: fear. And I can't put my thoughts into words until this fact has burdened me for 2 years. Because of course I know what fear does to each individual, and what each individual is then able to do, sometimes to decide against reason, but fear dominates him, and out of fear he is insecure. And if you can weaken these things, then it is something that I believe contributes significantly also to the body in its entire decomposition. Fear does something with me, to really pick up and be there for him. Of course, the mood regulation also improves, especially in the context of eating disorders. But we have also had good experiences in the context of a beginning dementia, and dementia is not a Damocles sword. Every dementia has causes. And if you know the causes of dementia and work specifically on the causes of a beginning dementia, then the body is well able to recover a lot, and lithium has a very important key role in this very moment. Today we see positive experiences in the treatment of Lyme borreliosis, also neuroborreliosis, headaches, thyroid gland hyperfunction, and many, many other diseases. Lithium itself as a low-dose food supplement already in small doses has significant effects on all neurotrophic substances. Neurotrophic substances are, for example, proteins that enhance the maturation factor of the nerve cells, or then maintain valuable transmission waves. Of course, all of this also improves, We also speak in neurology of the so-called synaptic plasticity, that is, lithium then increases the circulation and brings these proteins into a healthier sensitivity to the receptors, so that the level of these neurotrophic factors is then strengthened and the proteins can then work in the cell. So it has an influence on the regulation of this special friction factor in the framework of brain development and also in the security and regeneration performance of the brain. Furthermore, it has an increased influence on the most important marker of the cell function, and this is why lithium involved, to increase the N-acetyl aspartate, NAA, sufficiently so that it guarantees the cellular brain function, brain performance, but also the durability. The body has a much higher intelligence in itself. I'm always talking about cosmic intelligence. That means the body is subject to a, perhaps divine plan, to do the right thing in a decisive situation. And to adapt this increased level to a particular situation of stress. It has to be able to respond to a sufficient lithium mirror. Further, lithium is incredibly valuable in the context of serotonin metabolism. You know, serotonin has something to do with our psyche, our mood, our appetite, our movement. Both are neurotransmitter dependent, also our stress burden. Here, lithium ensures an optimal serotonin metabolism. Of course, this is produced from L-tryptophan, a protein, in the metabolism to serotonin and then to melatonin. In order to feel, not to be cold. To feel a well-being. To feel happiness, to live in contentment. This supports the synthesis of serotonin, and lithium is responsible for this. These lithium ions have an effect on the so-called serotonin synthesis. They help to store serotonin, to release it accordingly, and then also to remove it within the serotonin metabolism. It is thus responsible for the entire synthesis of this neurotransmitter. You all know, we talk about a loss of dopamine in Parkinson's disease. We prescribe dopamine precursors. L-dopamine, in the context of Modapar and other drugs. This therapy is guidelines-based, which we have been using for more than 40 years in the subject of Parkinson's disease. But we have no success with it, but the patients are getting more and more into receptor sensitivity, they need more and more of Modapar. This is a disease picture that we see and understand differently. The removal of dopamine. And dopamine is of course an important neurotransmitter, which we need to move forward, which we need as a so-called happiness hormone. To regulate our cognition, our movement, and our reward system. All of this is also dopamine. Positive experiences, such as a beautiful, deep, happy moment, an orgasm, a wonderful dinner, also addictive substances produce a lot of dopamine. And whenever dopamine is there is this deep, deep feeling of high satisfaction and relaxation. People who cannot live their own lives for various reasons, but often long to get into this state only once, but lithium regulates that. We know today, and we have often talked about the enzyme that breaks down dopamine, the COMT. On the one hand, this is an enzyme that, of course, at the moment, lithium, or how else should I say it, is an enzyme that breaks down dopamine from the receptor. This is a very, very valuable process, but lithium can support and control all of this. Lithium regulates the glutamate metabolism. You all know that there is a lot of glutamate in ready-to-eat food. Glutamate is a very fast neurotransmitter in the context of neurotransmitters that are also very fast generating neurotransmitters. And it promotes biochemical substances in our body. The learning, our memory, is trained with it. But if we have too much glutamate, then the degradation is too strong, and it leads to an overstimulation of the nerve cells, which can then die out. That is why it is important that lithium, at this moment, also deactivates the nerve cell receptor in such a way that the glutamate in a higher form cannot damage and affect the cell in this form. There is still a long way to go. Medicine is something very big, very exciting. And if you try to understand a little bit in the context of these cellular biochemical processes, then you will not get past the fact that in the organism the monoamino oxidase, an enzyme, that in its high oxidativity, just like the COMT, breaks down adrenaline, dopamine, but also serotonin, and strictly regulates. If this enzyme is somehow not sufficient or too high, the breakdown can be endangered. You must not forget that all neurotransmitters that transmit information to the cell, dock to the cell, have to be dismantled again. And if this is prevented, because in the context of the marrow-reduced activity behavioral disorders occur, or aggression is suddenly an issue, then lithium has to come into play. Because lithium can act as an adaptogen. That means, it causes the neurotransmitter systems to adapt to adaptogens accordingly, and thus has the entire homeostasis within our state of consciousness. A very large control function. Lithium, as part of the low-dose application, never exceeds 5 to a maximum of 30 mg without side effects. In my everyday life, this is actually always the highest priority for what I do. I am not allowed to do any harm. And that's why the side effect you read is not just something that occurs in the research of this drug. And it's not a side effect, but it's an effect. And you really have to understand the side effects of lithium in order to understand whether effort or risk and benefit are in balance. Lithium has another possible task. Many neurodegenerative diseases that we see today go back to the potential of inflammations. As part of this very instructive talk show, but also of the incredibly many topics that QS24 provides for you, For a long time you have grown into a conscious person who knows today that the root of the plant in humans is our gut. And we have to deal with silent inflammation, small inflammations that actually sometimes go down completely in everyday life. We have to recognize them, because they trigger inflammation in the brain. This is the so-called blood-brain axis, which becomes just as permeable through the many environmental toxins, but also through the circuit via the sympathicus parasympathicus to the brain of the intestine. Lithium, however, has an effect on these pro-inflammatory factors. Inflammation is always also guaranteed by so-called cytokines. That is, as part of our immune system. You know what cytokines are today? These are neurotransmitters that have the task of pro-inflammatory, i.e., triggering inflammation, because there is a problem, or anti-inflammatory. Interleukins, interferons, and certain growth factors, such as interleukin-1b or TNF-alpha, can be slowed down by lithium and reduced in their strong activity. Lithium is not just someone who modulates the neurotransmitter system here, protects the receptors of the nerve cells and also becomes active against inflammation. But lithium protects us from free radicals. Free radicals, this is also very common with them. We are talking about oxidative stress here. And this oxidative stress, which inevitably arises when the cell uses oxygen, must be intercepted by an antioxidant. Otherwise, lipids or proteins change, or the human genome, the DNA in the brain cells, will then solve problems sooner or later. And these lithium ions keep these free radicals in check. Lithium thus increases the antioxidative defense and thus strengthens the brain and the neurotransmitter change in the context of this anti- or oxidative attack. That means, in the context of a good lithium supply, you increase the gluteal mirror in the brain. And if you take the glutathione, let's say not take glutathione, but for example the precursor of glutathione, the N-acetylcysteine or sulfur, MSM, in combination with vitamin C, with selenium, with carotene, these are all high antioxidative active substances. Then you have a very good antioxidative protection also on your neurotransmitter change. Lithium is not only a radical catcher, but lithium also improves the mitochondrial function. And our brain, of course, also has mitochondria in its nerve cells. And we don't really talk about mitochondrial pathology, about a disruption in cell energy metabolism in medicine that often. But that's actually the key for almost all diseases, that the mitochondrial performance is reduced. And that the mitochondrial mass is now activated, that many mitochondria are reactivated, that all this cell metabolism, which in turn monitors the DNA, the mitochondrial performance, is now important to ensure signal transmission, cell differentiation, and also apoptosis. Because if a cell is mutated, if it gets sick, or if it has also reached its age, must be made by apoptosis, by a healthy cell death, the decision of the degeneration. This regulates the mitochondria, and here lithium can make a really valuable contribution. So, lithium also has an impact on brain metabolism as part of energy supply. On the other hand, it supports many processes in nerve metabolism by regulating damaging enzymes. That's the GSK3. That's a kinase enzyme which is responsible for the sugar metabolism of the brain up to the gene transcription. That means, with the regulation and the development of new neurons. This enzyme is often overstimulated and thus people become hyperactive. Lithium can essentially inhibit, reduce, and adapt this function cycle, which then arises to the optimum. Lithium is also a trace element which introduces apoptosis or autophagy. That's what I was talking about, that abnormal or mutated cells or also disease-prone or old cells then pass into a normal cell death or thus cleanse the plateau. The body has to regenerate millions of new cells every day, it has to remove old ones, it has to send new ones back through stem cells into the brain, which then differentiate. Lithium then activates this autophagy process or mechanism. And last but not least, it helps healthy cells to survive in a valuable stability. To give the necessary conditions and to stabilize. At the beginning, I mentioned that lithium is the so-called Cinderella drug. Today, I don't want to call it a knight, but I want to call it a savior. And I would like, if there is a move into a medical field in which we succeed, to reintegrate lithium well and firmly again. This is important to the GP, to the neurologist, to the psychiatrist, but also to many other colleagues. But what is much, much more important to me, because it is a food supplement and thus easily manageable, that you know it and that you can take care of it, also with a good, sufficient, low amounts of lithium, in case of an indication, whatever it may be. To take care of yourself. With this in mind, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a wonderful week. I am very happy about this coming one. And for all the questions you have for me, for any medical advice you want, I look forward to it. Please send it to visite-at-qs24.tv. And in this sense, take good care of yourself and see you again next week. Thank you.